Welcome back to another episode of Swamp Stories. For this episode, we continue the long-awaited Baton Rouge Part 2. But before we get into it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you're new. You can also follow the Instagram page as well. So let's get into it. I ended the last episode around 2011, but I skipped over a huge event that occurred just a few years earlier. So let's head back to 2005. On August 23rd, 2005, one of the worst hurricanes of all time swept through the state of Louisiana. Although Hurricane Katrina touched a good portion of Louisiana, New Orleans ended up getting hit the worst by far. The city's poor infrastructure led to flooding all over, which ultimately destroyed most of the city. Thousands of people were left in the flood with no food or drinking water. That would be until September 3rd, when the entire city was completely evacuated.
Hit this ramp, where as you can see there are personal belongings all along. This is where people camped out for days waiting to be rescued. It's not pretty.
Mountains of people's belongings left behind when they were rescued litter the landscape.
80% of New Orleans was flooded. Billions and billions of gallons of water swept over the city.
Now, you might be wondering what this has to do with Baton Rouge, but trust me, it'll make sense. So after everyone in New Orleans had lost their homes, cars, and jobs, FEMA stepped up to the plate and paid out money to everyone from New Orleans. Now mind you, New Orleans was already one of the poorest cities in the country. And on top of this, some would say that it was the roughest as well. It was filled with housing projects such as the Magnolia, Calliope, and St. Bernard, which were known as awful places. So here's what happened next. After receiving thousands of dollars in payouts, these residents began finding new cities to live in. Some went to Atlanta, others went to Houston, but a large amount decided to stay closer to home and move to Baton Rouge. And here's what began happening. All of these cities started to have major issues. Atlanta, Houston, and Baton Rouge began being taken over by the most cold-blooded guys they had ever seen. The New Orleans people were not afraid to take over anywhere they went. So an already poor and distraught city had a major influx of people who had all but given up on life at this point. But instead of housing projects like New Orleans, Baton Rouge is full of houses just like this, everywhere. It's really like the Detroit of the South. You can drive down the street and assume a house is abandoned and then see a family living inside. It's a whole different level of struggle that you won't find anywhere else. Well, the New Orleans influx resulted in Baton Rouge having the highest spike in crime they had ever seen. So the already crazy city had gotten much worse just like that. And for those of you who think I'm exaggerating, I'm really not. The generations of broken homes, abuse, crime, lack of guidance, and overall sense of fear has led to absolute chaos in the city of Baton Rouge. And unlike other cities where rivalries have been consistent for generations, in the 225 it all changes on a daily basis. Friends turn into enemies, families cross each other, and no one seems to care one bit about the consequences. Simply bumping into someone at the mall can be the end for you. Welcome to the new Baton Rouge. But before we get into it, let me run the intro. Baton Rouge has changed a lot, but in order to see how it got this way, let's head back to where we left off. After Boosie moved to Atlanta, South Baton Rouge was still all together. In fact, a lot of people would still call the top and bottom family at that point, despite all the internal affairs. So let me recap for those of you who don't know. South Baton Rouge has two groups. First, you have TBG, also known as Top Boy Gorilla. They represent the top of South Baton Rouge. And then you have BBG, who represent the bottom. Anyways, as the years went by, some members ended up in Angola, others at Winfield, and a small few were able to successfully leave that life. And that leads us to the new TBG. Let me break it down. TBG began having a new leader, a young man by the name of Garrett Burton, also known as G Money. He grew up in the Glen Oaks neighborhood of North Baton Rouge. And I know that may sound confusing, but neighborhoods don't matter at all. Instead, it's all about who you roll with. And G Money was introduced to TBG through his uncle who goes by Cleasy 5. Anyways, without a mother or father present in his life, G Money had to fend for himself at a very young age. He also had the responsibility of watching over his younger brother named Lil Herc, and this guy is pretty important to the story. But at a certain point in his childhood, his living situation became so staggeringly bad that a close friend of his would allow him to come stay with him. That would be Frederick Givens, also known as Fredo Bang, and here is the house they lived in together. When I say that Baton Rouge is on a different level of trenches, believe me, the fact that this house was a step up for G Money is hard to imagine. But this is just a regular thing for the kids in Baton Rouge, abandonment and poverty. But regardless of their unfortunate upbringing, the teenagers would come together and begin making hit songs and catching fire in Baton Rouge. They signed to the local TBG Records, and that's how they were first able to get off their feet. And this is around the time that G Money's brother Lil Herc began bringing around his best friend from North Baton Rouge. That would be a kid by the name of Kentrell Gallman, also known as YoungBoy. Kentrell grew up in North Baton Rouge on 38th and Chippewa. He and Lil Herc were inseparable as kids, like the closest that best friends can possibly be. And they say friendship is based on commonalities, so it's no wonder that YoungBoy instantly clicked with Herc, G Money, and the rest of TBG. They all had the exact same story. YoungBoy's father was never around, and according to him, his mother wasn't around either. So for most of his childhood, he was left to fend for himself and grow up way too early. After doing a juvenile bid, Lil Herc would introduce him to his older brother G Money. And at this point, YoungBoy's living situation had gotten so bad that G Money actually had to move into his place. And sadly, this is when division would begin, but not exactly how you would imagine. YoungBoy would get into a dispute with his cousin named Boozilla over some stolen money. Boozilla, who is a certified BBG member, was not happy, and according to G Money, he tried to line up his own cousin for the back door. So in response to his cousin, YoungBoy would begin rolling with TBG for his own protection. He was so embedded within TBG that you can even see him wearing their apparel. So G Money pretty much became a big brother for YoungBoy, and they were all against Boozilla and the rest of BBG. While TBG Records ended up signing YoungBoy to an awful deal with no cash advance or industry push. And in all honesty, their focus was on G Money, and YoungBoy was kind of an afterthought. So after months of not getting paid, YoungBoy distanced himself from TBG and created his own group. That would be NBA, also known as Never Broke Again. And here is the big dilemma. YoungBoy had just burnt the bridge with G Money and the rest of TBG, and he had previously burnt the bridge with Boozilla and BBG, so he had to swallow his pride one way or the other, because in Baton Rouge, having multiple rivals is a recipe for disaster. So finally, YoungBoy decided to rekindle his relationship with his cousin Boozilla and start rolling with BBG, and this here would not please G Money one bit. He felt betrayed by YoungBoy, and he's not really wrong for that, but in his defense, he really needed to go elsewhere due to the lack of money, but maybe joining forces with his rivals was a savage move. So G Money would get back at him in the pettiest way possible. He allegedly would have an affair with YoungBoy's sister, and to make everything worse, he would rap about it and then talk about it in an interview.
Not really, he mad about his sister too though.
About his sister?
Yeah, a long time ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he mad about that.
Although this may seem like just a petty move between friends, in Baton Rouge, this is enough to start a rivalry, and that's exactly what would happen. TBG became instant rivals with NBA and BBG, and here is where things get crazy. November 2nd, 2016. Boozilla leaves his house on the 1900 block of Nebraska Street, and he heads down to Highland Road. But as soon as he turns the corner, bam! This incident would devastate BBG and YoungBoy especially, but they're so used to this that any sad emotions had to take a backseat. So YoungBoy and two of his close BBG friends would wait for a few hours for the scene to clear, and then they would take a trip down to South Baton Rouge. They locate the house of the people that they think are responsible, and bam! They did not complete the mission, so the next day they would try again. Thankfully, everyone was okay, but things would come falling down just a few weeks later. On November 28th, 2016, YoungBoy was arrested just before a show in Austin, Texas. Now mind you, in California, you wouldn't be surprised if he was released, but this is Louisiana, one of the strictest states in the country. But somehow YoungBoy was released after just 7 months in August of 2017. Here was his punishment, a $5,000 fine and 2 250 hours of community service. However, the driver, whose name is Derek Geis, got sentenced to 2 years, and this definitely raised some eyebrows in Baton Rouge. Also, Derek Geis is the brother of NFL running back Darius Geis, which is wild. Anyways, after YoungBoy got out, he went on to release his hit song Untouchable, which took him to the next level. But while his mainstream success is going well, things in Baton Rouge are in complete chaos. Everyone began looking at G Money for being responsible for what happened to Boozilla. Their rivalry was known for a long time, so it only made sense, and BBG was thinking the same thing. And that takes us to September 10th, 2017. G Money goes to the studio on Dallas Drive, and after the studio session at about 2 in the morning, he casually steps outside. Bang. Baton Rouge was instantly in shock. G Money was one of their biggest up-and-coming rappers with millions of views and a bright future. And after this, all eyes were pointed in one direction: NBA YoungBoy. However, no arrest would be made, at least for a few years. Sadly, after this happened, G Money's best friend Fredo Bang was locked up and had to receive the news over the phone. And the craziest part is that when he went down in early 2016, everyone was still friends. In just over a year, a small friend group had turned into the city's biggest rivalry. This is just how disagreements are handled in Baton Rouge. Fredo Bang was not fazed one bit, and that introduces us to a new character, a man by the name of Mayoshi Edwards, also known as Lit Yoshi. And this guy is absolutely insane. He doesn't care who you are or where he finds you. He is always ready. And because of this reputation, he earned the highest rank within TBG, especially after this next incident. May 4th, 2018. YoungBoy's manager Desmond Hardnett, also known as NBA Dump, is hanging out in front of his childhood home. This is in an area called Valley Park or College Drive, which you can usually hear YoungBoy refer to in his music. Anyways, somehow he gets word of Dump's location, so he allegedly gets in his car and heads down to Valley Park, and boom, there he is, a heavy-set man in the middle of the street with his girlfriend. Bam. Another devastating loss for YoungBoy and BBG, but it wouldn't be long before they would return the favor. On November 25th, TBG's manager Boulevard Quick went live and dissed YoungBoy and his mom.
On the floor, I got us keeping it too real.
Yeah, man.
Then YoungBoy would respond.
But if I ain't tripping, mama, I can't see that nigga. It's a joke, man. Don't mix my rap life with my music life. You gonna see when I have a laugh.
The little boy Quick was talking about me, but I really got on him to tell him that I'm sorry. I came to tell little Boulevard Quick that I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I made you cry, boo. For real. I'm sorry, boo. I'm sorry I put your name in your mouth because I saw you crying. She looked like a man. She ugly. She got man features. I'm sorry, boo. I'm sorry for talking about you because you look like a ball. You got round features, boo. I'm sorry. She want to be a comedian so bad. You want to be a rapper so bad. I'm sorry I made you cry.
And it's safe to say that this was his last straw. But first, they would have to locate where to find Boulevard Quick. Somehow the next day they got his address, the Lakeside Villa Apartments, an upscale community near the very last exit of Baton Rouge. But this wouldn't be far enough to get out of NBA's reach. On November 26th, they would sit outside his apartment. Bang. At this point, all relations are beyond repair, and NBA YoungBoy has built a reckless reputation. And this reputation is valid because he will literally react to any instigation as if he's not a celebrity. Whether it's in LA getting pressed by the bounty hunters, which he wasn't scared one bit, or at the mall being pressed by a random person, YoungBoy will throw his life away for his pride 9 times out of 10. But for 2019 and 2020, he completely owned those years, banger after banger. Sadly though, things would come to a halt in September of 2020. During a music video in Baton Rouge, a neighbor would call 911 due to loud music and commotion. So BRPD would show up, which kind of seems to be rare. Well, at least given what Quando Rondo said.
You ever been around Baton Rouge?
Come on, man. Come on, man.
I mean, can you compare? Do you think Baton Rouge? What's the difference between Baton Rouge and Savannah? You think? What you would say?
Baton Rouge ain't got no police like that, boy. You could get away with anything, bro. Straight up.
Anyways, they would find all kinds of toolage that YoungBoy cannot legally be around. They also confiscated $80,000 cash. However, YoungBoy was released on bond, but then on March 22nd, 2021, he would run into more trouble. While in LA, another neighbor would call 911 about chaos at YoungBoy's Airbnb. LAPD would arrive and YoungBoy would take them on a chase through the neighborhood. Well, he wouldn't make it far, and this might have been his last straw. At first, he was facing over 20 years, but now it's looking more like 3 to 7. And the judge allowed him to move to Utah on house arrest and record music, which he now drops an album like every week it seems like, but there are 2 reasons he dropped so much. First, he signed a deal with Atlantic Records where they own all the rights and profits to his music, and he has to drop a few more projects to get out of the contract and finally make some money. And the second reason is that he's facing all these years, so he needs to have some music stored. Well, after YoungBoy went down, so would some more key players in Baton Rouge. TBG's top enforcer Late Yoshi would finally go down for all kinds of incidents, one of which occurred in Miami where he spotted YoungBoy at a hotel. He is currently facing 20 years. Then, a key factor on YoungBoy's side would go down as well. DeAndre Fields, also known as NBA Pap, went down for the events on September 10th, 2017, where G Money lost his life. So here we are in 2022, and NBA YoungBoy's success is at an all-time high. But despite the success, his personal and family life has not gotten better one bit. In fact, he's inadvertently recreating the same cycle for his own children. And what do I mean by that? Well, he already has 8 kids by 7 women at the age of 22 years old. And between going on tour, studio time, and jail bids, it would literally be impossible for him to be a full-time father. But in his defense, I truly believe that he does not know any better. This is how he was raised and all of his friends as well. And it's possibly how his parents were raised and on and on. It's evident that YoungBoy has been looking for love and acceptance his entire life. He even alluded to his grandma being the only person he has ever felt love from. So it's no wonder that he jumps from BNE to TBG to BBG and then to NBA. It also reflects in his relationships as well. It seems like every month he's dating or having a kid with a new woman. And not to play therapist here, but he also raps about needing his mom in his life and how she wasn't there when he needed her most. But this upbringing isn't unique to YoungBoy at all. In fact, everyone in this video has a similar story. And that really makes you wonder, do they actually hate each other? Like, did they really hate G Money that much to the point where they wanted him gone? Or deep down, do they see themselves within him? At the end of the day, we all wish they could see the bigger picture, and that the little issues they have with one another are literally so minimal in the grand scheme of things. Everyone in this video is talented and a potential millionaire, and if they had handled their issues peacefully, they'd all be on a beach together laughing to the bank. But sadly, this reality hasn't sunk in, and honestly, how could it? When you have to worry about watching your back 24/7 or wondering where your next meal is gonna come from, the bigger picture is the last thing on your mind. For that reason, Baton Rouge is a giant trap, inescapable unless you are extremely careful and focused. And that trap would apply to YoungBoy's 2 younger brothers. So here's a story that many people don't know about. YoungBoy's 2 younger brothers, Jeffrey Tate and Devon Tate, were arrested in 2019 after a 17-year-old named Javon Brown was found on Ottawa Drive. He was allegedly walking home from school when the 2 men approached him. It's crazy that with a multi-millionaire brother, you are still living the life that he's worked hard to get out of. But when it's all they know, there's nothing you can do about it. Now with most of TBG and NBA being locked up or moved out of Louisiana, there isn't much noise surrounding the rivalry. Instead, new characters have stepped up to the plate, causing all kinds of drama in Baton Rouge. And that can be a whole separate episode if you want it. But all in all, when we look back at the TBG versus NBA rivalry, it's really no different than episode 1. Friends had an argument and it turned into something way bigger, and it spiraled from there on. But what do you guys think needs to change? There are plenty of jobs available in Baton Rouge that pay decent money. So what else can be done? But that's gonna do it for this episode of Swamp Stories.